They said no white man survived meeting the Apache Queen until a cowboy shared her tent. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get into today's story. In the harsh, unforgiving land of the American West, there were whispers of a woman so powerful, so fierce, that even the toughest of men dared not challenge her. She was known as the Apache Queen, and her reputation struck fear into the hearts of any who heard her name. The stories went that no white man who crossed her path ever lived to tell the tale. Their lives were claimed in moments of bloodshed and fury, a brutal reminder of the consequences of underestimating her and her people. The Apache Queen ruled her tribe with an iron will, and her influence stretched across the desert like a shadow that could not be escaped. But there was one man who would defy the odds, one man who would face the Queen of the Apache and live to tell the tale. His name was Caleb Thornfield, a cowboy who had roamed the West with nothing but his horse, his rifle, and a heart full of courage. Caleb was no stranger to danger, having faced countless challenges in his years on the frontier. But when he found himself deep in Apache territory, he knew he was about to face something unlike anything he had ever encountered. The sun was setting on a long day of riding when Caleb reached the edge of a small Apache village. He had heard rumors of the Apache Queen's power and beauty, but nothing prepared him for the woman who stepped out from the shadows. She was tall, with dark eyes that gleamed like polished obsidian, and her presence commanded respect. Her long black hair flowed like a river of night, and her posture exuded the confidence of someone who had never been defeated. As Caleb approached, he could feel the weight of her gaze on him, as though she were sizing him up, deciding whether he was worth her time. The air was thick with tension as they stood facing one another, neither speaking a word. Caleb's hand rested on the hilt of his rifle, but he made no move to draw it. The Apache Queen did not need to speak for her power to be felt. She was a force of nature, and Caleb knew he had to tread carefully. The silence stretched on, and just when it seemed like Caleb would have to make the first move, the Queen spoke. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, but there was a steel edge to it that left no room for doubt. "You are far from home, cowboy," she said, her words carrying the weight of an accusation. Caleb stood tall, meeting her gaze with unwavering confidence. "I've traveled far and wide, but I'm not here to fight. I'm here to speak with you." The Apache Queen studied him for a long moment, her eyes never leaving his. She had seen many men before, but this one was different. He was not like the others who had come to claim her land or challenge her tribe. There was something about him that intrigued her, something that made her wonder what his true purpose was. "You think you can just walk into my land and speak to me as if you are my equal?" she asked, her tone still calm, but with an underlying warning. Caleb's voice was steady as he responded, "I don't think I'm your equal, but I'm here to ask for something. A simple request, if you will." The Apache Queen raised an eyebrow, clearly curious. "And what is it that you ask, cowboy?" "I ask that you allow me to share your tent for the night," Caleb said, his eyes not leaving hers. The request hung in the air, impossible and unexpected. No one had ever dared to make such a request of the Apache Queen, but Caleb's calm demeanor seemed to catch her off guard. She had been ready to send him away or perhaps have him removed by force, but now, she hesitated. There was something about this cowboy that made her pause. The Apache Queen, known for her ruthlessness and power, stood in silence, weighing her options. What would this cowboy's presence mean for her tribe, for her people? And why had he come to her? Of all people, with such a request? It was a question she had no immediate answer to, but one that would change the course of both their lives. The night was falling fast, and as the campfires flickered, the stars began to appear, casting a soft light on the desert landscape. Caleb stood firm, waiting for her response, while the Apache Queen remained silent, her thoughts hidden behind the veil of her dark eyes. The Apache Queen studied Caleb for a long moment, her gaze never wavering. His request, so simple yet so audacious, hung in the air between them. The crackling campfire cast flickering shadows over her face, making her look almost otherworldly. The tension was palpable, thick with the weight of unspoken words. Caleb stood tall, waiting for her response. He had come a long way, endured many dangers, but nothing compared to this. In the presence of this powerful woman, a force of nature, his heart raced, but he held his ground. For the first time, he felt like he was standing on the edge of something much bigger than himself. The Apache Queen broke the silence, her voice cool and steady. "You asked to share my tent, Cowboy. Do you understand the consequences of such a request?" Her eyes held a challenge, daring him to back down. Caleb did not flinch. "I understand," he replied, his voice unwavering. "But I believe we have much to talk about." The Apache Queen regarded him for a moment longer, her expression unreadable. Then, with a slight nod, she motioned for him to follow. "Come," she said. "We will talk. But know this, Cowboy. I do not share my space lightly, and neither do I entertain weak hearts." Caleb nodded, his chest swelling with determination. He had faced worse threats before, but none quite like this. As he followed her through the village, he couldn't help but notice the way the other Apache warriors watched him with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. They had all heard the stories, just as he had, of men who had entered the Apache Queen's presence and never returned. This was not a place for weakness. They reached the large tent where the Apache Queen made her home. The entrance was guarded by two massive warriors, their faces painted with symbols of power and strength. Caleb nodded at them as he passed, feeling the weight of their gaze. Inside, the tent was surprisingly warm, the air thick with the scent of burning sage and herbs. A fire pit crackled in the center, and the walls were adorned with intricate tapestries depicting the history of the Apache people. The queen motioned for him to sit, and he obeyed, feeling the heavy silence settle around them. "You asked to share my tent," she repeated, her voice now softer, though still firm. "But you do not yet understand what you are asking." Caleb met her eyes, his voice steady. "I understand enough. I need your help." The Apache Queen raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Help? You, a man who has wandered into my land without permission, without understanding, think you can ask for help?" "I don't expect favors," Caleb said, his tone respectful. "I simply need guidance. I've come to your land seeking peace, not conflict. But I'm being hunted by men who will stop at nothing to see me dead." She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. The firelight flickered across her face, casting shadows that made her look like a figure from myth. "You think I will help you because you share the same skin color as the men who have slaughtered my people?" she asked, her voice sharp with the weight of history. Caleb's eyes darkened. "No," he said quietly. "I do not expect you to help me because of my skin. I am here because I believe we can both gain something from each other. I have fought battles in the past, and I will fight again. But I would rather have an ally than an enemy." The Apache Queen's lips curled into a small smile, one that was both amused and dangerous. "An ally," she mused, her voice low and measured. "You think I would become your ally simply because you ask?" "No," Caleb said firmly. "But I believe you are not a woman who acts out of fear. You are a leader. You fight for your people, and I fight for mine. There is a way for us to work together." The queen stood suddenly, moving with the grace and strength that defined her. She paced around the fire, her eyes never leaving him. "I am a queen," she said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of history. "I do not need allies. I need loyalty. I need warriors who will fight beside me, not for personal gain, but for the survival of my people." Caleb leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "I offer you that loyalty, not just as a man, but as someone who understands what it means to protect those who cannot protect themselves. I can help you, Apache Queen. Let me show you." For the first time since they had met, the queen seemed to hesitate. She stopped pacing, her eyes narrowing as she considered his words. The fire crackled in the silence that followed, the only sound between them the soft wind that rustled the canvas of the tent. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer but no less commanding. "I will allow you to stay, Cowboy," she said, her eyes locking with his. "But understand this. In my land, there is no room for weakness. You will prove your worth, or you will leave." Caleb nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I will prove it," he said. "You have my word." And so, in that moment, something changed between them. It was not love, not yet, but something deeper, an understanding that ran beneath the surface of their words, something that neither of them could yet name. The Apache Queen had allowed him to stay, to share her tent, and in doing so, she had opened the door to a possibility neither of them could have foreseen. Little did they know, the path ahead would be one of trials, trust, and the kind of bond that only forged in the crucible of battle and hardship. But for now, they sat in silence, the fire between them a symbol of the fragile peace that had begun to take root. The next morning, the sun rose over the desert, casting its golden light across the rugged land. The fire inside the tent had long since died down, but the warmth from it lingered in the air. Caleb awoke to find the Apache Queen sitting across from him, her dark eyes still focused on him as if she had been awake for hours, watching over him. There was something both comforting and unsettling about her gaze. She had kept her word. He had shared her tent, and now the real test was about to begin. "You said you would prove your worth," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of the previous night's conversation. "It is time to see if you can. There is a task that needs to be done." Caleb stretched, his muscles aching from the long ride the previous day. He had slept little, his mind racing with the possibilities of what the Queen had in store for him. The challenge had begun, and there would be no turning back. "What task?" he asked, his voice steady. She rose to her feet with the grace of a warrior, her movements fluid and purposeful. "The village is under threat," she said, her voice now hard, filled with the authority she wielded as leader of her people. "A band of raiders is moving through our lands. We cannot allow them to continue unchecked. They will be stopped." Caleb stood and followed her outside. The village was waking up, the warriors beginning their morning rituals. The sight of the Apache people preparing for battle reminded him of just how out of place he was in this world. But he had made a promise, and he would keep it. He had to prove he could be more than just an outsider. "What do you need me to do?" he asked, his gaze meeting hers. "You will accompany my warriors," she said, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the horizon. "You will fight with us. You will prove that you are not just another man seeking refuge in our land. You will stand beside us, or you will leave." There was no room for hesitation in her words, and Caleb could feel the weight of them. He had no intention of leaving. "I'll fight," he said firmly, his voice unwavering. The Queen nodded and turned, signaling for him to follow. They made their way to where the warriors were gathering, their horses lined up and ready. The Apache Queen's presence commanded respect, and the warriors seemed to part for her, ready to follow her every command. Caleb mounted his horse, feeling the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. He was no stranger to battle, but this was different. This was not just a fight for survival. It was a fight for honor, for trust, and for the bond that had begun to form between him and the Apache people. As they rode out of the village, the desert stretched before them, an endless expanse of sand and rock. The wind whipped through the air, carrying the scent of the dry earth. Caleb couldn't help but think back to the stories he had heard of the Apache warriors, of their ferocity and skill in battle. He had heard that no one could defeat them. Now, he was about to see it for himself. The ride was long and silent, the only sounds the rhythmic thud of the horses' hooves and the occasional rustle of the wind. As they neared the raiders' camp, the tension in the air grew thicker. The Apache Queen had said little since they left, but Caleb could feel the weight of her presence beside him. She was not just a warrior. She was a leader, a woman who carried the burden of her people's survival on her shoulders. They approached the raiders' camp under the cover of darkness, the moonlight casting long shadows over the scene. The raiders were busy around a campfire, unaware of the Apache warriors who were closing in on them. Caleb's heart raced. This was it. He was about to face the first real test of his loyalty, and he could feel the Queen's eyes on him, as if she were waiting to see what he would do. "Stay close," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. "We strike at dawn." Caleb nodded, his hand resting on the hilt of his rifle. He had fought many battles in his life, but none like this. He was not just fighting for himself. He was fighting for the Apache Queen, for the people she led, and for the bond they were beginning to form. As the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, the Apache warriors moved like shadows, swift and silent. The raiders were still unaware of the danger that was closing in on them. Caleb could feel the tension rise in his chest as the moment of truth approached. The Apache Queen was at the front, leading the charge, her warriors following her with the discipline of a well-trained army. Caleb followed behind, his rifle raised, ready to fight. The moment they were within range, the Apache Queen gave the signal. The warriors erupted into action, their war cries echoing across the desert. Caleb was swept up in the chaos, his heart pounding as he fought alongside the Apache warriors. The raiders were no match for the skill and precision of the Apache people. Caleb fought fiercely, his every move guided by the Queen's leadership. As the battle raged on, Caleb could feel his respect for the Apache Queen growing. She was not just a leader, she was a force of nature. She fought with the strength and determination of someone who had known loss, but also victory. When the dust finally settled, the raiders were defeated. Caleb stood among the Apache warriors, breathing heavily, his body aching from the fight. The Apache Queen approached him, her expression unreadable. "You fought well," she said, her voice steady. "You have proven yourself." Caleb nodded, his chest swelling with pride. He had done it. He had fought alongside the Apache people, and in doing so, he had earned their respect. He had earned her respect. The days that followed the battle were tense, but there was an undeniable change in the air. The Apache Queen, who had once looked at Caleb with nothing but suspicion, now regarded him with something closer to respect. It was a quiet acknowledgement, not spoken, but felt in the way she included him in the council meetings, in the way she shared her plans. Caleb, for his part, had earned his place among them, and he knew that this was only the beginning of something deeper. He had proven himself as a fighter, but now he had to prove his worth in other ways that would test his loyalty and his heart. A week passed, and the village began to recover from the raid. The warriors went about their usual training, while the women and children tended to the wounded and helped repair the damage done during the battle. Caleb found himself settling into a new routine, helping where he could. He wasn't just a guest anymore. He was part of something bigger. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Caleb found himself alone with the Apache Queen by the river. The sound of the flowing water was the only noise between them, as the desert night crept in, cold and silent. They stood there, watching the water, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Finally, it was the Queen who broke the silence. "You have proven yourself," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But there is more to this life than fighting." Caleb turned to face her, his brow furrowed in curiosity. "What do you mean?" "I lead my people, not just in battle, but in everything," she replied, her gaze never leaving the water. "I make decisions that affect the future of my tribe. You are not just a warrior now. You are a part of that future, whether you like it or not." Her words hit him harder than he expected. Caleb had always considered himself a loner, a man who wandered where the wind took him. But now, standing beside this powerful woman, he realized that his life had changed in ways he hadn't fully understood. "I'm not a leader," he said, his voice a little rough. "I don't know how to lead people." The Queen turned to him then, her dark eyes searching his face. "You don't have to lead alone," she said. "You just have to be willing to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves." Her words echoed in his mind long after she had walked away. It was a call to action, a challenge that went beyond the battlefield. The following days were filled with decisions that tested Caleb's resolve. There were skirmishes with rival tribes, disputes over land, and the constant struggle to maintain peace in a world that was always on the brink of chaos. The Queen's leadership was unyielding, and Caleb found himself standing by her side more and more, offering his strength when needed. It was in these quiet moments, working together, that something began to shift between them. They were no longer just allies, bound by a common cause. There was something deeper now, an unspoken understanding, a connection that neither of them could ignore. But the road ahead was not an easy one. The rival tribe that had threatened the Apache people was not finished. In fact, their forces were gathering, preparing for a final confrontation that would determine the fate of the land. The Queen knew this battle was coming, and she could feel the weight of it bearing down on her shoulders. Caleb could see the strain in her eyes, the way her shoulders tensed when she thought no one was looking. She was a leader, but even leaders had their breaking points. One evening, as the camp settled into a rare moment of calm, Caleb found the Queen alone near the fire. The crackling flames illuminated her face, casting long shadows across her features. She looked older in that moment, wearier, as if the burden of leadership was finally starting to take its toll. "You are strong," Caleb said, his voice gentle. But even the strongest need help. She turned to him, her eyes narrowing slightly, not in suspicion, but in something deeper, recognition. I know, she said, her voice soft. But the help I need is not something anyone can give. Caleb stepped closer, his heart beating faster as he realized what she was saying. I'm not asking for help in the way you think, she continued, her gaze steady. I'm asking you to stay with me, to stay by my side when the battle comes. It's not just about fighting. It's about what happens after. If we survive this, we will need to rebuild. And I need you to help me do that. The weight of her words settled over him like a heavy cloak. She wasn't just asking him to fight. She was asking him to commit, to her people, to the future they would build together. Caleb stood there for a long moment, the firelight dancing in his eyes. He had always been a man who lived in the present, never looking too far ahead. But in that moment, with the Apache Queen standing before him, he saw a future he never thought possible. I'm with you, he said finally, his voice firm, as if making a promise to both of them. I'll stay. The Queen nodded, her expression softening for the first time in days. Then we fight together, and whatever comes after, we face it together. As the night stretched on, Caleb knew that this battle would change everything. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something bigger, something worth fighting for. And with the Apache Queen at his side, he felt ready to face whatever the future held. The days that followed were filled with anticipation and tension. Caleb and the Apache Queen worked side by side, preparing for the inevitable conflict with the rival tribe. The final battle was nearing, and the weight of it hung over them like a storm on the horizon. Caleb could see the resolve in the Queen's eyes, but there was also a sadness, a quiet understanding that this battle might cost them everything. As the village readied itself for war, Caleb found himself reflecting on the path that had brought him here. The man who had once wandered the West, without purpose or direction, was now tied to something much larger than himself. He was tied to the Apache Queen and her people. It wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a fight for the future, for a world where two cultures could stand together instead of tearing each other apart. He had never imagined this kind of life, but now that he had tasted it, he could not turn back. On the eve of battle, the village was quiet, save for the occasional murmur of warriors sharpening their weapons or tending to their horses. Caleb stood outside the Queen's tent, the weight of his own thoughts pressing down on him. He was no stranger to war, but this was different. The stakes were higher, the consequences more personal. He had made a promise to the Queen, a promise to stay and fight for her and her people. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, he found himself wondering if he was truly ready for what lay ahead. The sound of footsteps approaching broke him from his thoughts. He turned to see the Queen walking toward him, her face set in determination. She was a woman who carried the weight of 1,000 lives on her shoulders, and yet she walked with the grace and strength of a warrior. Are you ready? She asked, her voice low and steady. Caleb nodded, his hand resting on the hilt of his rifle. I've been ready for this my whole life. The Queen studied him for a moment, her dark eyes searching his face. This is not just about fighting, Caleb, she said softly. It's about protecting what matters most. It's about protecting our people, our land, and our future. Are you willing to give everything for that? Caleb looked into her eyes, feeling the weight of her words. He had already given so much, his freedom, his past, his identity. But now, standing before her, he realized that this was what he had been searching for all along. I will give everything, he said, his voice steady and resolute. The Queen's lips curved into a small smile, and for the first time in days, Caleb saw a flicker of warmth in her eyes. Then let's fight together, she said. As the night stretched on, Caleb and the Queen stood together, looking out over the village. The warriors were ready. The time for words had passed. The time for action had come. The final battle was upon them, and they would face it as one. The following morning, the sun rose to a cloudless sky, and the desert air was thick with anticipation. Caleb stood among the Apache warriors, his rifle at his side, his heart pounding in his chest. The Queen rode at the front, her warriors behind her, a force of nature ready to strike. They rode out into the open desert, the wind whipping through their hair as they moved with purpose. Caleb could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the moment bearing down on him. This was it. The enemy tribe lay ahead, their camp visible in the distance. The time for talking was over. The battle would begin soon. As they closed the distance, Caleb could see the enemy warriors preparing for the fight. They were well armed, but Caleb knew that the Apache warriors, under the leadership of the Queen, would be unstoppable. The two sides met in the center of the desert, the clash of weapons ringing out as the battle erupted. Caleb fought alongside the Apache warriors, his rifle raised and his heart focused on the task at hand. The enemy tribe was fierce, but the Apache were stronger. The Queen led her warriors with the precision and strength of a seasoned commander, her every move decisive and calculated. Caleb fought with everything he had, his rifle firing in quick succession as he moved with the rhythm of battle. The air was thick with dust and the sound of clashing weapons. But through it all, Caleb felt a sense of purpose that he had never known before. As the battle raged on, Caleb found himself fighting not just for his survival, but for the Queen, for her people, and for the future they would build together. The fight was brutal, but in the end, the Apache warriors emerged victorious. The enemy tribe was scattered, their forces broken, and the land was once again under the protection of the Apache Queen. As the dust settled and the warriors began to regroup, Caleb stood beside the Queen, his chest heaving with exhaustion. She turned to him, her expression unreadable, and for a moment, there was silence between them. Then, she spoke. "You fought well," she said, her voice steady but tinged with something softer. Caleb nodded, his heart still racing. "We fought well," he corrected. The Queen regarded him for a moment longer before nodding in agreement. "Yes, we did." It was in that moment that Caleb realized something that he had known deep down all along. He wasn't just fighting for her anymore. He was fighting for them, for a future they could build together. As the sun set on the battlefield, Caleb and the Queen stood side by side, their hearts beating as one, ready to face whatever came next. The weeks that followed the battle were filled with quiet rebuilding. The Apache warriors worked tirelessly to restore their camp and heal the wounded, while the people went about their daily lives with a renewed sense of purpose. The Queen, who had always carried herself with strength, now seemed more burdened than ever. Caleb could see it in the way she moved, the way her gaze lingered on the horizon, as if she were searching for something beyond what was right in front of her. He had fought beside her, stood by her side in battle, but he knew that her fight was not just physical. It was a battle for the future of her people. They both felt the weight of their choices. As the days passed, Caleb began to notice the subtle changes in his own feelings. What had started as a bond of necessity, a shared fight for survival, had slowly transformed into something more complex. He found himself thinking about her when she was not around, wondering what drove her, what fears she kept hidden behind her strong exterior. It was more than just admiration. It was something deeper, something he hadn't expected. One evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, Caleb and the Queen sat near the fire, the embers glowing softly in the growing darkness. The warriors and villagers were scattered around, tending to their tasks or sitting in quiet conversation. But in this moment, it was just the two of them. Caleb glanced over at her, his thoughts momentarily pulled away from the crackling fire. "You've been quiet," he said, his voice breaking the silence between them. "What's on your mind?" The Queen did not answer immediately. She stared into the fire, her expression unreadable. Caleb could see the way her jaw tightened slightly, the way her hands gripped the leather of her pants. He knew there was something she was not saying, something weighing on her heart. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but heavy. "This battle was only the beginning," she said. "Our people are not safe. The land is still divided. The enemy will return, and they will bring more with them. We will fight again and again. But it's not just war we must fight. It's everything." Caleb frowned, not fully understanding what she meant. "What do you mean, everything?" She turned her gaze toward him, her dark eyes intense. "The land is broken. The tribes are broken. The settlers, the soldiers, the politicians, none of them see what is happening here. They don't understand the land, the people. To them, we are just obstacles to be removed. I have to lead my people, but I also have to fight for their place in this world. And I don't know if I can win that fight." Her words struck Caleb harder than he expected. He had always admired her strength, her determination, but now he saw the weight of it. The responsibility that came with being a leader, a queen, a protector. It was a burden that no one could fully understand unless they had carried it themselves. He reached out, his hand resting on hers. The simple touch seemed to ground her, and for a moment, she closed her eyes, as if drawing strength from the contact. "You don't have to carry it alone," Caleb said, his voice low. "I'm here. I'll help you whatever it takes." She looked at him then, her eyes softening for the first time in weeks. It was a fleeting moment, but it was enough. "I know," she said quietly, "but you have your own fight, your own people to worry about." Caleb shook his head. "I don't have anyone left. Not really. My fight is with you now." The Queen looked at him for a long moment, and for a brief second, Caleb saw something shift in her eyes, a recognition of the bond they shared, something beyond words. She nodded slowly, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Then we fight together," she said, her voice firm once more. The decision was made. As the night settled around them, Caleb knew that the road ahead would be filled with more battles, more uncertainty. But for the first time, he felt as if he was truly part of something, part of the Apache Queen's vision, part of her fight for her people and their future. He wasn't just an outsider anymore. He was family. And with that, Caleb knew that whatever came next, he would face it by her side. The next morning, the village was alive with preparations. Word had spread that a new threat was looming. An alliance of settler forces was marching through the land, their sights set on the Apache's territory. The Queen's warriors were preparing to defend their land once again. Caleb found himself riding alongside them, his heart focused and ready. He was no longer just a cowboy, no longer just a man from a different world. He was a warrior, fighting for the woman who had shown him what true strength looked like, for the people who had accepted him as one of their own. And when the battle came, he would fight with everything he had, for the future they had promised each other. As the sun rose high in the sky, Caleb and the Apache Queen led their people into the fray, side by side, ready to protect the land they both called home. The battle that had been looming for days finally arrived, and the air was thick with tension. Caleb rode alongside the Apache Queen, her presence commanding the respect of everyone around her. The warriors were lined up, ready for the fight ahead, their faces set in determination. Caleb could feel the weight of the moment, the final test of everything they had fought for. The alliance of settlers was not a small force. They had numbers and firepower, but the Apache warriors had something they couldn't match: unity, skill, and the will to defend their land at all costs. As the first shots rang out across the battlefield, Caleb's heart pounded in his chest. He had been in many battles, but none quite like this. This was no longer just about survival. It was about protecting everything they had built, everything they had fought for. He saw the Apache Queen in the thick of it, leading her people with the fierceness of a lioness protecting her cubs. She moved with precision, each step calculated, every strike deliberate. Caleb followed her lead, his rifle steady in his hands as he fired at the approaching settlers. The chaos of the battlefield surrounded him, but in that chaos, he felt a sense of purpose he had never known before. The fight was brutal, but the Apache warriors fought with unmatched determination. They moved like shadows, swift and relentless, pushing the settlers back with every strike. Caleb found himself fighting alongside the Queen, each moment an affirmation of his commitment to her cause. The battle raged on, the desert air filled with the sounds of gunfire and the clash of steel. But through it all, Caleb's focus never wavered. He kept his eyes on the Queen, his heart beating in rhythm with hers as they fought side by side. Hours passed, and the tide of the battle began to turn. The settlers, though numerous, were not prepared for the fierce resistance they encountered. The Apache warriors were relentless, driven by a shared purpose, and slowly but surely, the settlers began to retreat. Caleb could feel the weight of the moment, the culmination of everything that had led them here. As the battle drew to a close, the Apache warriors emerged victorious. The settlers had been pushed back, their forces scattered and broken. Caleb stood among the warriors, his body sore from the fight, but his heart swelling with pride. He had fought beside the Apache Queen, and together, they had protected their people and their land. The Queen approached him, her face still as composed as ever, though there was a glimmer of something softer in her eyes. "You fought well, Caleb," she said, her voice low but filled with genuine respect. Caleb nodded, his chest still heaving from the exertion. We fought well, he corrected, his gaze meeting hers. The queen gave a small, approving smile, but her eyes soon turned serious again. This victory is not the end, she said, her voice steady. There will always be others who wish to take what is ours. But today, we have proven that we will not be so easily defeated. Caleb understood the weight of her words. The battle was over, but the war for their land, their way of life, was far from finished. They had won today, but there would always be more challenges ahead. The queen turned her gaze to the horizon, her eyes narrowing as if she could already see the next battle coming. We will rebuild, she said, her voice firm, and we will stand strong, no matter what comes. Caleb stood beside her, feeling the power of her resolve. He had made a promise to her, a promise to stand by her side, and in that moment, he knew he would keep it, no matter the cost. As the sun set over the battlefield, casting long shadows across the land, Caleb knew that this was only the beginning. The Apache Queen had led her people to victory, but the journey ahead would be long and fraught with danger. And Caleb would be there, by her side, ready to fight for the future they both believed in. The victory over the settlers brought a brief sense of peace to the Apache tribe, but Caleb knew it was only temporary. The queen had made it clear that their struggle was far from over. In the days that followed, the Apache warriors gathered, recovering from the fight and preparing for what was to come. The camp was alive with activity, but there was a somber air that hung over the village. The queen had kept her promise to protect her people, but the cost was heavy, and the future was uncertain. Caleb found himself by her side more than ever, offering what strength he could. She had trusted him in battle, but now, as the dust settled and the reality of their situation set in, Caleb could see the weight of leadership on her shoulders. She walked with purpose, but there were moments when the burden of her responsibilities seemed to wear her down. One evening, as the moon rose high in the sky, Caleb found the queen standing alone by the river, her gaze fixed on the water. It was a rare moment of solitude, and he approached her carefully, not wanting to disturb her, but feeling compelled to offer his support. "You've been quiet," Caleb said, his voice low. The queen didn't turn to face him right away. Instead, she stood still, as if lost in thought, before finally speaking. "I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this," she said, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. "Every decision I make affects my people. Every choice could mean life or death for us all. And yet, I feel like I'm failing them." Caleb's heart ached at the vulnerability in her words. He had always seen her as strong, unyielding, but in that moment, he saw the weight of her humanity. "You're not failing them," he said gently, stepping closer. "You've led them through battles. You've protected them, and you've given them hope." The queen finally turned to face him, her eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion and uncertainty. "But is that enough?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly. "Hope can only take us so far. We are fighting a war we cannot win alone, and I am running out of answers." Caleb could see the doubt in her eyes, but he also saw the fire that still burned inside her. She was not ready to give up, not yet. "We don't have to fight alone," Caleb said, his voice steady. "You have me, and you have your people. Together, we'll find a way." The queen didn't respond right away, but Caleb could see that his words had reached her. She took a deep breath, as if steadying herself, before nodding. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I have always carried this burden alone, but perhaps it's time I let others help carry it." Caleb smiled at her, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. He had seen her strength, but now he saw something even more powerful, the ability to trust, to allow others to share in her fight. It was a turning point, not just for her, but for them both. Over the following weeks, Caleb and the queen worked side by side, not just as allies in battle, but as partners in leadership. They strategized together, consulted with the tribe's elders, and slowly began to rebuild what had been broken. The Apache people had endured much, but their spirit had not been crushed. And neither had the queens. There were still challenges ahead. The settlers were regrouping, and other tribes were eyeing the Apache lands with greed. But Caleb knew that with the queen leading them, they had a chance. And with him by her side, they would face whatever came together. The queen stood tall once more, no longer burdened by the weight of her responsibilities alone. She had allies, she had strength, and she had Caleb. And together, they would fight for the future of their people, no matter what it took. As they rode out once more, the wind at their backs and the desert stretching endlessly before them, Caleb felt the connection between them solidify. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about building a future they would build together. The battle was far from over, but with each passing day, Caleb knew that the Queen's leadership was becoming stronger, more united. They would fight side by side, not just as warriors, but as equals. And in the end, that would make all the difference. The final confrontation came sooner than anyone expected. The days of rebuilding, of finding peace within the tribe, had been brief. The settlers had regrouped and joined forces with other factions, and now they were marching again, stronger than before, determined to push the Apache people from their land. Caleb stood with the Queen, watching the horizon where the dust from the advancing army swirled in the wind. There was no fear in her eyes, only resolve. He knew that, despite all their efforts to prepare, this battle would decide everything. The Apache warriors were ready. They had been training for this moment, strengthening their resolve, knowing that if they failed, they would lose not just their land but their way of life. Caleb stood beside the Queen, his heart beating in sync with hers. Their bond had deepened over the weeks they had spent together, not just as allies but as something more. They had shared their fears, their hopes, and their plans for the future. And now, standing on the brink of war, Caleb knew that they were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting for a future they both believed in. As the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the desert, the Queen spoke, her voice steady and strong. "This is it," she said, "the moment we have all been preparing for. We fight not just for today, but for our future, for our children, for our people, and for everything we hold dear." Caleb nodded, his hand resting on the rifle at his side. "We fight together," he said, his voice firm. "No matter what happens, we fight together." The Queen looked at him, her dark eyes full of something deeper than just strength. There was trust, a trust that had been built over countless battles fought side by side. She gave him a small nod, and together they led their people to the battlefield. The sound of hooves and marching feet filled the air as the two armies faced off. The settlers, well-armed and organized, seemed like an unstoppable force. But the Apache warriors were no strangers to battle. They were fierce, determined, and united under the leadership of their Queen. Caleb could see the battle lines forming, the tension building. He had been through many fights in his life, but this was different. This was not just about survival. It was about preserving a way of life, a culture that had existed long before the settlers ever came. As the battle began, the Apache warriors charged with a fierce cry, their weapons raised high. Caleb fought alongside them, his rifle steady as he fired, his movements fluid and precise. The Queen led the charge, her presence inspiring the warriors around her. She was everywhere, moving like the wind, striking with the precision of a master. Caleb could feel the power of her leadership as he fought by her side. The battle was fierce, and the sound of gunfire and war cries echoed across the desert. The settlers were well organized, but they were not prepared for the ferocity of the Apache warriors. The Queen's strategies, combined with the Apache warriors' skill, began to turn the tide in their favor. Caleb fought with everything he had, his heart and mind focused on the task at hand. But as the battle raged on, he knew that this was not just a fight for survival. It was a fight for the future, for everything they had worked for. Hours passed, and the tide of the battle shifted. The settlers, despite their numbers, were being pushed back. The Apache warriors fought with a strength and unity that was unmatched. Caleb, exhausted but determined, looked to the Queen. She was still leading, still inspiring her people. And in that moment, he knew that they had already won, not just because of the victory on the battlefield, but because of the bond they had forged. As the last of the settlers retreated, Caleb stood beside the Queen, watching as her people celebrated their hard-earned victory. The Queen, her face marked with both exhaustion and triumph, turned to him. "We have won," she said softly. "But the battle is never truly over." Caleb nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "I know," he replied. "But today, we have fought for something more than just survival. We've fought for our future." The Queen's lips curved into a small smile, one that was filled with gratitude and pride. "Together," she said, "we will continue to fight for that future, no matter what comes." The sun set over the desert, casting a warm glow over the land they had fought to protect. Caleb and the Queen stood side by side, knowing that their journey was far from over. But for the first time in a long while, they felt hopeful. Together, they had proven that no matter the odds, no matter the challenges, they could face anything, together.